As the invasion fell upon the metro area of Dallas-Fort Worth, the PLA forces present comprised of predominantly the PLA's 59th Group Army, a large reserve PLA Group Army with 64,000 personnel as opposed to the ordinary numbers of 50 to 50,000. They were also again attached with the 83rd Air Assault Brigade from the PLA 83rd Group Army, an active duty Group Army, fighting in the battle in Houston, and were effectively given their Air Assault Brigade to the PLA 59th Group Army by the war planners, as it was decided that the 1st PLA and Marine Brigade, which would storm ashore in the Houston metro area, had sufficient air assault capabilities, and thus these forces were deemed more necessary deeper inland, as this was an enormous metropolitan area, and there were objectives here which needed to be seized rapidly and immediately. As the 83rd Air Assault Brigade's forces were acting in concert with the PLA 59th Group Army, effectively, when the clock struck midnight, a complete and total blitz upon the city of Dallas had effectively begun, as the sheer force of the air power alone, along with the combined might of the PLA strategic missile forces, the PLA artillery forces, and the various maneuver elements, even the air defense forces playing a key role in this particular battle, the city was now in a state of complete and total paralysis, as the different forces laid down an enormous volley of all manner of fire onto the American defenders, who were not at all prepared for what had effectively fallen upon them, as everything from the armored forces, infantry forces, combat engineers, all of which complemented by an enormous quantity of loitering munitions, even combat drones like this Wing Loon 2, which, with the artillery support and within infantry units, their heavy mortar and 130 millimeter short-range multiple-launch rocket support, the devastation was total, as the defending forces were again effectively left completely in the dark, as this was both in the literal sense, as it was midnight and the entire grid had gone down, but it was also in the figurative sense as well, as all command and control capabilities were now completely paralyzed. There were no ISR capabilities, no IT capabilities, nothing whatsoever at all, as America had effectively been thrust deep into the Stone Age and its forces thrown into a complete state of disarray and chaos, as the very powerful PLA forces began to move against all of their various objectives, which included everything from the key invasion route of I-35, which in fact was in two sections in the DFW metro area, as the highway of I-35 effectively split into two sections in the town of Hillsborough and reconnected in the town of Gainesville, as the different fighting forces also had to contend with the local population, as there were many people who were armed and tried to fight back against them. The PLA forces mostly found this a negligible threat, as their ISR dominance, their firepower and tactical dominance, their technological dominance simply made this mostly a non-issue. Although it was more of an annoyance to the PLA than anything else, it was something that they still had to deal with, which was one of several different roles played by the 83rd Air Assault Brigade of the PLA's 83rd Group Army, an active duty group army prosecuting the war in the Houston metro area, who was able, by the war planners' assessment, to hand over, at least for the Dallas operation, their Air Assault Brigade, as the PLAN 1st Marine Brigade had sufficient air assault capabilities for the operation in Houston, as it was deemed by the war planners. And thus, the reserve PLA 59th Group Army, which was a large reserve group army compared to ordinary PLA group armies, who typically had between 50 and 55,000 people, were given these extensive additional capabilities. As this was already a very heavily armed and large group army, the additional air assault forces made them exceedingly more flexible and rapid in their ability to respond to the developing situation, as the battlefield was fluid and was constantly in flux. As the artillery forces were simply massive, not just with the Group Army's artillery brigade, but within its maneuver elements, as they too possessed artillery, as the 35th Armor Brigade and the 16th Infantry Brigade possessed the self-propelled PLZ-05 155mm howitzers, and their 24th Light Infantry Brigade, the PCL-181 155mm howitzer that was truck-based and even faster and more mobile than any of the other artillery. All of this firepower, along with the air power, such as the JH-7 squadron, earmarked specifically for this battle space, as well as the strategic bombers, which lent enormous destruction against enemy targets, such as the H-6Ks, which carried a large 34,000-pound payload and came with the complement of electronic warfare capabilities in the form of the KG-600 electromagnetic jamming pods, as did the JH-7 strike aircraft as well, which, along with this heavy firepower in the form of the 34,000 pounds of air-to-ground munitions, this was a very formidable aircraft. Although the new H-20 stealth bomber carried 90,000 pounds of air-to-ground munitions, or 45 tons effectively. This, although it did not have electronic warfare capabilities, was a stealth aircraft, which was its specialty effectively as an aircraft, and the enormous payload more than made up for any other possible shortcomings, as there were two of these aircraft allocated to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There were three of the H-6Ks to go with the two fighter squadrons, as there was one J-10 squadron and one J-11 squadron of fighter aircraft there to guarantee coalition air superiority over the DFW battle space, and of course the strike aircraft squadron of the potent and heavy-hitting JH-7s. As even the air defense forces effectively played a role in this battle by knocking out of the sky American F-A-18s, typically done in this particular battle by the HQ-12s, as they could hit fighter aircraft easily, as their missiles could hit slant targets with their Mach 3.5 speed, which was even more than enough to knock subsonic cruise missiles out of the sky, as they could also hit drones and helos as well. This was a very versatile air defense platform and very capable, especially when paired with the newest and most advanced radars of China in terms of air defenses. The HQ-2J, which would knock the KC-46A refueling aircraft out of the sky, flying over the battle space from the Altus Air Force Base in Oklahoma at the opening of the invasion. This air defense system, or systems, as there were 2 battalions of these, were paired to the YLC-8E highly portable anti-stealth radars, which could see 5th-generation aircraft and enable these exceedingly high altitude and medium range systems to knock them out of the sky just as they would any other aircraft. As the altitude of these missiles maxed out at 18 miles, there was no aircraft that could fly that high. This system had been highly upgraded over the years, and this was not even the newest and greatest of China's air defense systems, and thus was typically used by reserve forces, as China had far superior systems to even this, such as the HQ-22, the HQ-9B, the HQ-19, and others. However, for a reserve air defense unit, this was still a highly effective weapon nonetheless, as was the HQ-12. For SHORAD capabilities, they had the HQ-7B, which had an 8-mile range and 3.2-mile high altitude, which was quite adequate for a SHORAD system, or a close-in air defense system, a short-range air defense platform. As all of these forces, including the combat engineers, who would fight heavily in this battle, were all going after their various objectives at the opening of this campaign, there were many flank clearance operations apart from all of the seizing of objectives. This would, in effect, burn up time, as time was a vital commodity in this invasion through the 4th generation warfare doctrines. Nonetheless, it still had to be achieved, and thus the fighting would drag on for 2 full days. Although the vast majority of it, the effectively most difficult part of it, would be over within the first day of fighting. However, on the second day, in the DFW battle, it would effectively be a mopping up operation being carried out by the PLA forces. As it pertained to the air assault forces, they were the most mobile of all the forces available in this particular battle space to the PLA, as they would be utilized in assisting in not only cutting off retreats as well as disrupting enemy forces, but also seizing objectives themselves. As it pertained to the downtown fighting, in both downtown Fort Worth and Dallas, such as in this image where they're landing on a high-rise to conduct their landing operation and establish their security zone, or like in this image where the same battalion's forces have landed and are fighting for control over an interstate bridge and section of the city. These troops were effectively disrupting any conceivable possibility of the locals, or even the American military forces, as again, within the downtown Dallas area. In fact, there was a bivouacked battalion, the 2nd of the 198th, an armored battalion from the 155th Armored Brigade Combat Team. They were there to disrupt the establishment of any formidable defenses in the downtown area. During the Oklahoma City battle, as it was going on at the same time concurrently, and the Waco battle as well, the locals had managed to have the time, resources, and ability to build up some sorts of defenses. which effectively had drugged the fighting out in those particular battles. However, that would not happen in this battle, as these air assault forces would completely disrupt any possibility of long and drawn out inner-city combat. They would effectively be dropped into these downtown areas to effectively prevent the highly incapable of communicating American forces from getting together, as in within earshot or line of sight communications, to be able to establish any coherent defenses. These forces would be highly effective in this endeavor, and they would be fully supported by loitering munitions, their own attack helo gunships, as each air assault battalion had a aviation company of these Z-10 attack helos, which were some of the best in the world, and also artillery support as well, as the artillery would effectively be some of the most busy forces on the map, as the fire missions would remain a constant. And men's arms would nearly wear out from the enormous quantity of shells that they would be hauling back and forth from their freshly dropped off pallets to the gun line. These men would need a long rest after this battle. So artillery work is hard work. Of that, there can be no doubt. Within the first 30 minutes of the battle breaking out, not only were different forces on the move, such as an armored battalion from the 35th moving directly to strike not only the Joint Naval Air Reserve base on Lake Worth, but it would also end up pursuing fleeing units along with a attacking battalion of light mechanized infantry from the 24th Light Infantry Brigade, who would, along with the armor, pursue, surround, cut off, and destroy these forces with artillery support. The Meacham International Airport, wherein there were also forces from the 1st of the 124th, namely its support company and its headquarters company, wherein they were trying to establish on the airport premises a logistical point for aerial resupply. Although this would not in effect be successful, as light mechanized infantry forces and the same H-6K that would effectively carpet munition the Lockheed Martin plant into oblivion would also fly over the area and drop some of its remaining payload onto the American forces on the Meacham International Airport premises, along with 2 JH-7 strike aircraft as well, also missile strikes and artillery strikes. Again, as mentioned many times in this hypothetical documentary series on 4th generation warfare doctrines, it was not at all uncommon for multiple different types of systems to hit the same target. Many people would think it was complete overkill, but it was simply a measure to ensure complete, absolute, and total destruction of a target. As the real-time AI battlefield data processing system was effectively guiding these forces on their approach, their attack, their movements, their everything, they directed these forces in exceedingly well-coordinated strikes. Everything from missiles to artillery, both howitzer and rocket, to the airstrikes, as well as even the strategic bombing. which was enormous. All of it, and the maneuver elements, all work together in a complete, coordinated symphony of total destruction. Even the loitering munitions were guided and controlled by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, as they had built within them an AI target-seeking mode. Again, the firepower involved was simply immense. And again, the destruction was absolute. Going to the map of the city, as again, many forces were on the move and were conducting flank clearance operations all throughout the city, including striking the main installation involved in this entire battle, which was the Joint Reserve Naval Air Station. The aviation, or the air assault forces rather, were already on the move. 2 battalions moving off-map into a secondary area from this primary battle space to seize the city of Weatherford, which was a not large city, but it was somewhat of a medium-sized city, if encompassing its surrounding area as well. This was to gain further control of the I-30 route out and in of this area, as 2 battalions were also moving to be the first to cut off any line of retreat out of the international airport, as armored battalions were striking it from the north. This all happening within the first hour. All of these movements, including the combat engineers attacking in Pleasant Grove in effectively the southeast of the Dallas area, as well as other forces on the move to both seize control of Rockwall on the other side of the Ray Hubbard Lake, as well as also clearing the flanks near its chief command elements and its electronic warfare regiment, which was highly important to the activities of these forces, and seizing the airport and clearing more flanks. As it pertained to the downtown area, Fort Worth had a higher number of armed civilians than even did Dallas, although Dallas was a bigger city. The population in Fort Worth was somewhat more conservative, it could be said, and they were a bit better armed. But one of the battalions, besides the 2 moving to Weatherford and the 2 moving to the international airport, 2 other battalions, as there was also a maintenance battalion and a headquarters battalion in this air assault brigade, 1 each was going to downtown Fort Worth and downtown Dallas. The one going to downtown Fort Worth had to conduct its first landing operations because they had to shuttle their air assault infantry companies into battle effectively. They had 15 Z-20 transport helos in their transport company in the battalion. They had their aviation company of Z-10 attack helo gunships, and they also had their mortar company, which was their fire support company of 82 millimeter mortars, and they had 4 of their air assault infantry companies and their headquarters company. Of all of these, they had to transport their air assault infantry in first, so they would move in 1 company at a time. 1 company would establish its security perimeter in its landing zone before more companies would be gradually shuttled in to assist in the combat, as by the time the entire force would be in the downtown area, the armed reactionary civilians would begin to start trying to coalesce and try to work out plans. But again, because the air assault forces were so rapid, because the flight time from their CCP regime property to these areas was not long at all, as a matter of just barely over 5 minutes for the Dallas area and even less to get to downtown Fort Worth. This shuttling operation was conducted exceedingly rapidly, and therefore, even though the armed reactionary civilians, beginning to try to figure out what was going on, would be highly disrupted by howitzer-based artillery fire, as the high-altitude ISR assets would spot them and target them when they began to coalesce in armed groups, as well as also the landing of the air assault infantry and the adjoining attack helo gunships, which were their Z-10 attack helo gunships. These were very powerful attack helos, and of course, the loitering munitions that were fired at the battalion level would also be assisting the troops in this operation. Many battalions were firing loitering munitions. They effectively were so great in number that it was almost impossible to see an area of sky where there weren't any present. As we go to the map of the south of the downtown of Fort Worth, this was effectively, literally in the southernmost end of downtown. In this particular area, I-30 West, or I-30W or West, runs through this area immediately to the east of downtown. There are also rail tracks that run all through this area. They're mostly freight rail. There's also passenger rail further to the north, as there's a train station for the Amtrak rail in that area, because there's Amtrak that runs through the Fort Worth to Dallas route, and there's other Amtrak routes as well. As the Z-20s were beginning to enter, they were now flying over parts of the city, just in the south of downtown here, that had been completely destroyed by 122mm rocket fires from the firing battalions, as there were 2 battalions of these Type 83s, and also the howitzer battalions of the both PLL-01s, as there were 2 PLL-01 battalions, and the 2 PLL-66 battalions. The different howitzer batteries and the different rocket batteries were constantly firing at different targets, not just in Fort Worth, but all throughout the city, and they were also joined by the artillery of the 16th ID and the 35th Armored Brigade, which again consisted of the self-propelled PLZ-01 155mm howitzers, and in the northwest, of course, there were the PCL-181 howitzers of the 24th Light Mechanized Infantry Brigade. Again, returning to the map of the south of the downtown of Fort Worth, to establish their landing zone in this area, they effectively flew their gunships out. They effectively moved out in a V shape, as these transport helos, these Z-20s, were flying effectively in the middle of the V. And as they got into the area, they began to fire their 25mm cannons, their 70mm rocket pods, and their AKD-21 ATGMs. As that was one type of ATGM they could use. There was also the HJOH, the AKD-12, or AKD-21s and AKD-10s. They were firing these ATGMs, rockets, and 25mm nose cannon fire at all of these civilian targets, as the rockets were slamming into the highway because they were deemed by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system to not cause any major damage to the highway infrastructure insofar as the actual top of the road itself, and thus could be used on these vehicle-based targets. It would cause minor damages, but nothing severe to where it would damage the structural integrity of the highway. This was a pair of the J-11 fighter aircraft, basically escorting the very same H-6K bomber, one of the 3 total in the battle space, to hit the Lockheed Martin plant first, before it would then effectively do a turn and hit the American forces on the Meacham International Airport premises. Effectively, they were just flying with it to get it to its first target zone, because it was still at this time that this is taking place, because it has to be understood at all times. These helos moved a lot faster than the armor and even the light mechanized infantry, who initially started out with this battalion as well, surrounding and destroying with artillery support this pocket of armed reactionary civilians before company by company disengaged to support the armor, which went straight in, to attack the installation. At this point in time, the heavy strategic bomber had not just arrived yet, and again, the exceedingly short flight distance of the helos got the first group of the air assault infantry there exceedingly fast. So by the time they're just getting here, and the aircraft are just arriving by 30 to 35 minutes in, they're already beginning their landing by the time these aircraft are entering the battle space. So effectively, by the time these aircraft are right here, these operations are starting, where a group of 5 helos, or 1 platoon, because a group of 5 helos can carry 10 each, that's 1 platoon. There's another platoon here and another platoon here. The headquarters platoon is staying back on the CCP regime property. They would be brought in last after all the combat forces are brought in. The real-time AI battlefield data processing system and radio could coordinate the whole entire mission without the headquarters elements being forward deployed. They didn't have to be. They could do everything through the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, but they would be moved in as soon as the entire area was secure first. And the attack helo gunships and the combat forces would be effectively doing this operation to secure the area first. So, as there are a lot of exit and entry ramps to I-35 in this area, there's a lot of businesses in the area, there's a lot of restaurants, bars, hotels, businesses, office buildings, everything you would expect to find in a major metropolitan downtown area is in this particular part of the map. Again, this is the southernmost edge of the downtown of Fort Worth. There's more of it to the north. This effectively is a 1 mile by 1 kilometer area. It's not a huge area, but it's one corner of the downtown battle space. And this is only the beginning of the landing operations, wherein the first air assault company is being brought in. So at this point in time, the attack helo gunships are firing their ATGMs, their 25mm main gun, and rocket pods when and where necessary, where deemed allowable by the real-time AI battlefield data processing system. And they're destroying all of these targets on the highway, including with rocket fire from this helo gunship, which absolutely annihilates all these vehicles moving in this direction and this direction. These are all technicals with armed men in there. They have been seen by the ISR assets, high-altitude satellite, etc., and will soon even be seen by the low-altitude quadcopter assets of these troops as they're brought in, because now they can scan even more in detail with even more drones operating in the area, because their low-level quadcopter drones overlay with the high-altitude and satellite to make a complete, full 3D mapping of the entire real-time battlefield, and will, along with the high-altitude assets, continue to plot friendly and enemy units on the combat data links, which are the feedback loop. They complete the feedback loop with the real-time AI battlefield data processing system, which is hooked into all of the ISR capabilities and can correctly identify enemies and friends and put them on the combat data links. They're also even, the real-time AI is also tied into the radars as well, which is another form of ISR, and can direct aircraft or air defense forces to fire on specific targets. All of this is real technology. It absolutely exists. China absolutely has it. They lead the world in AI. And Russia also is quite far on AI, and they have very similar capabilities to China, and both have blended their capabilities in this invasion for the sole express purpose of working together to take over America and divvy up North America. as China will get the lower 48, Russia the Arctic, including Arctic Canada and Greenland. The forces would first smash the lower 48, which was the heartland of their primary enemy, which was the United States of America. And now, as these forces are moving through the area and there's people trying to flee from buildings, they get this far before, as they cross, they're pounded by artillery fire, as these imminent strike markers indicate. There's also personnel running this way who will be hit by loitering munitions. These vehicles will be hit by loitering munitions as well, and attack helo gunship fire. As soon as this helo has finished firing its missiles, its ATGMs, at these forces in this parking lot. And as these aircraft come in, as these attack helos have cleared this urban parking lot here, there's a little toll shack, they've fired their missiles, their AKD-21s, and have completely annihilated these forces along with 25 millimeter fire. They destroyed this technical, and this platoon here is landing on the roof of this building, and they will send 2 squads to clear this building as well. This is a hotel, and this is like one of those urban apartment towers. They're establishing a security zone on this block to use it as a further landing zone for the follow-up companies, so they have a secure area to land. The helos will continue moving up to effectively plow the streets and the tops of buildings to ensure they're completely clear. This will prevent any hostile forces from moving towards the secured landing zones. This is the landing operation. This is where they're initially coming in, setting up, and making sure they can shuttle in more forces to bolster their numbers, and then they can actually do a thorough clearance operation. But for now, the gunships are effectively taking care of any enemy personnel they find on roofs, out in the streets. It's effectively impossible at this point to stop these forces. And these forces, once they all completely land from the entire battalion that's moving into Fort Worth, once they completely land, they're going to thoroughly push up through the entire downtown, clearing every single solitary building, which will take hours, but it'll be done. And they'll have gunship support, loitering munition support, and artillery support the whole way through. Also mortar support once their last company comes in, which is their mortar company, besides all their headquarters platoons and of course the headquarters company itself over the battalion, but they will stay back. As the helo gunships move up, they're still plowing the streets, and as these personnel tried to get away, as they survived the ATGM strikes and some of the 25 millimeter strikes, they're fired at by 25 millimeter nose cannons as they reorient their fire further ahead. Loitering munitions circling the area come in as well and hit them as well. Loitering munition is getting personnel on this roof that have gotten to the roof to get a better view. They're getting hit by a loitering munition strike and destroyed. These are armed with fragmentation warheads, as they were not anticipating having to fight any heavy forces in the downtown area, because the downtown of Fort Worth does not have any American military in it, only the northwest of the city, and now the southwest, as units will be retreating once the fighting that's concurrently now beginning to unfold in the installation will effectively conclude. They will have by then retreated, headed for the southwest. But that has not happened yet, as this map is literally happening at the exact same time as the initial fighting that's beginning to break out at the installation, as the forces are here at the opening of the map right as the heavy strategic bomber is about to pass. But again, these fly exceedingly fast, so it'll be there in a matter of seconds from the downtown Fort Worth area. It'll be there in like 3 or 4 seconds. As they, again, are clearing the streets and the rooftops, they make it possible for all these platoons to land, who, again, secure their LZ for further troop drops as they come into the LZs, which are effectively, they're establishing their security zones, their LZ security zones. So these are secure areas where they can continuously land troops, and then they will spread out and effectively move up the streets having helo gunships support the entire way through as they clear buildings for hours. There will be times where these will have to return for fuel and possibly maintenance, but upon being refueled and having simple maintenance procedures and checks done, they will be immediately returning to continually support their forces on the ground. As the loitering munitions will be a constant, as will artillery support, the absence of any of these attack helo gunships for a short amount of time will effectively not really be that much of a problem for these forces. It won't be really a big deal because they will also have mortar support by then by their own mortar company by the time these actually even run out of fuel, because by then they will have landed as well, the 82 millimeter mortars. As this platoon lands here, these 5 helos, they drop their troops off on top of this building after these forces had been completely cut down by the attack helo fire as they were coming in. These forces were already KIA'd before the map even opened up, as were these. All of these forces on these buildings as well. Anything on this block effectively was already KIA'd by the time these helos arrived. They were coming in a V shape, firing at everything that they were oriented towards, and they destroyed these forces, making it safe for these troops to land. If there was anybody inside of these buildings, this was a hotel, this was a parallel adjacent parking garage that's connected to this hotel and connected to this office here on this block. If there was anybody inside of these buildings, these troops would have gone down through the roof access, down the stairs, and cleared the building thoroughly to eradicate them. As the helos took care of everybody on the roofs and on top of the parking garage, these troops, upon having landed, would thoroughly sweep this entire area, parking garage included, to ensure that there were no hostiles. As these buildings, they took care of the hostiles on the roof. Eventually, after this area was secured, this area was thoroughly secured as these troops cleared the adjacent building, this hotel. The other third platoon, the third combat platoon that was moving in, would be landed on this building here, which is a hospital. They'll be landing in this building. As these forces tried to cross, these armed reactionary civilians, they were completely cut down by 25 millimeter fire. Some would make it in the building, and there were hostiles inside of this building itself. So this entire platoon would be fighting its way. Not all of them survived as they were engaged as they crossed. There were some that were wiped out, but others made it across and in. But they would be fighting their way through this entire hospital, meaning they would also be engaging these troops or these armed civilians inside this part of the building. The 5 platoons would make this a secure area upon having successfully eradicated or captured these forces and thus made it a secure landing zone after these helos moved up and began to clear more streets and rooftops, and made it a new secure landing zone for further shuttling of troops. Because once these landings had all occurred with these 3 combat platoons, they immediately would leave, return to their CCP regime property, pick up the next company, bring them in, and land them in these same sites, by which point these helos will have moved up even further and away from this area, plowing, proverbially speaking, all the streets and the rooftops to ensure that it was not safe whatsoever at all for any types of hostiles to be walking out in the open. That also included loitering munitions, and now that these forces had quadcopter recon on the ground, they too would be sending them out to sweep the entire area to pinpoint other areas that maybe the high altitude or satellite assets couldn't see. And as a result of this, they could call in even more precise coordinates for artillery strikes. I mean, exactly right over top, and they call in the radio in the exact coordinates or where they anticipate them to be. A real-time AI battlefield data processing system would create an instant strike package in milliseconds and send it down in a second to the artillery forces, who would thereby launch their artillery strikes in real time. As this was one of the phenomenal capabilities and devastating ones when it came to AI, as it was capable of making all these calculations in milliseconds and spitting out answers in seconds. It was crunching various domains of data in relationship with the battlefield, with all the forces involved, the weapons involved, everything, terrain, urban, street maps, all of it, building layouts, everything. And was sending it all back to the forces on the ground in seconds after crunched data in milliseconds. Also sending down strike packages in seconds, making it possible to rapidly hit and annihilate the enemy personnel. It made weapons far more deadlier than they ever could have been because they're far more precise, because it could even be anticipated where forces would be in a matter of seconds, thus calling down even more accurate fire. It was devastating. The airstrikes as well. As now, the air assault battalion would continually bring their forces in as the loitering munitions, helo gunships, artillery cleared the way, all at first directed by the high-altitude drones and also the satellite. Now the quadcopter assets of these forces were in play in the local area, and they would map out the battlefield in even more detail, again, making everything far more precise, in addition to the high-altitude and satellite-based ISR capabilities, which already the high-altitude drones were very precise, but the quadcopter assets were even more exact and assisted in a complete overlay of the battlefield, three-dimensional, in real time too. So it was devastating, the capabilities. And as the entire battalion would be landed now in these 3 secured sites, they would begin to fan out and patrol the larger area and effectively clear each and every building, as the helos would get everything on the outside, everything on the streets, everything on the sidewalks, everything on the rooftops, as well as the loitering munitions and artillery if and when necessary, as the PLA really wanted a large section of the downtown intact because they wanted a red zone in this area for colonization for the new colonists after the war was won. Same went for Dallas. They wanted large portions of the downtown intact. They weren't trying to destroy the whole thing, but some parts of it could be sacrificed. As this was in the southernmost end of downtown. Downtown really began in this area, and now it was about to be thoroughly cleared by air assault troops who were about to go building to building, clearing each and every building. And on the outside, the attack helo gunships would effectively reign supreme, along with the humble loitering munition, as the CH-901As and Z-10 gunships, as well as the quadcopter assets patrolling the area, would ensure that any target seen would be completely annihilated immediately. As this, again, was only the initial landing operation for the fighting that would now be ongoing for several hours, as again, it would take some time, even for 4 total infantry companies of air assault infantry, backed up by their mortar company, to clear this entire downtown area from the south of downtown moving up. It would take several hours. So even with the helo gunship support outside and the loitering munitions, it would still take time. But this is effectively how the operation to clear downtown was now kicking off. It was now initiated. It was underway. In the next video of this Sino-Russian coalition invasion, hypothetical 4th-generation warfare documentary series, the battle for the Meacham International Airport will be covered next. Again, all of these battles that are being covered and have been covered insofar as it relates to the installation, the Joint Reserve Naval Air Station, are all breaking out just within the first hour alone. All of these battles are occurring concurrently, and they last varying amounts of time. Some battles end faster than others, and of course this is due to various factors, such as the intensity of firepower, the types of places, the objectives involved, the goals of the objectives, as in, do the invaders want something intact versus is it okay to completely destroy it? various factors are in play which determine the lengths of different combat operations. And as it relates to the fighting in Fort Worth, due to the fact that they wanted the downtown intact as it pertained to the PLA as a red zone, the fighting would take, again, several hours to clear all of the major buildings in downtown, with all the different forces of the Air Assault Battalion of its 4 infantry companies of Air Assault Infantry, backed up by their mortar company, which would all be going through the buildings in the downtown area, building to building, until the downtown had been thoroughly cleared. As it pertained to the Meacham International Airport, this, insofar as in the Fort Worth side of the Metroplex, was itself a major objective, and it was wanted intact. And it would be taken intact even with a heavy strategic raid along with airstrikes from JH-7s, as well as even artillery strikes, because the American logistical center that was being set up out and away from the main buildings. And it would be hit with a high degree of precision and completely wiped out and destroyed, insofar as the American forces and their logistical site. More to come next.